of okra. Maybe to other people this isn't a bunch, but for just the two of us, this is way more than we're going to eat at one time. So we're thinking about different ways that we like to prepare it, and especially ways that we like to preserve it so that we can carry this harvest in to use the rest of the year when okra's not going to grow. This has been a bumper crop of okra for us this year, and we're delighted to have the problem of what to do with so much okra. The first thing that we're going to talk about is making pickled okra. To do this, I selected the smaller, shorter pods of okra, and I cut the top off of them. Some recipes say to also cut the tip off, but we've been doing pretty well with leaving the tips on, so either way. But we learned in our first batch this year that if they're too tall, they seem to put pressure on the jar, and we had one jar to crack. So we hope that we learned from that, and now we're trying to make sure that they are the right height for the jars. So these are trimmed already. I have been sterilizing some new jars in the water bath canner, and it has been boiling away, so these are very clean jars now. But since we're going to be water bath canning, you want to make sure that you aren't allowing any kind of bacteria or something like that into your jars, because they aren't going to be pressure canned. So it's important that you treat them safely. The recipe we're using calls for putting a 1/4 inch slice of lemon in the bottom of each jar, so I can do that, and also 1 clove of garlic per jar. Then they have a variety of spices that they called for in different quantities, but it has red pepper flakes, mustard seed, celery seed, fennel seed, and black pepper corns or peppercorns. It calls for 1 tablespoon of this spice mixture per jar. So I'm just going to measure in, should be pretty close here, per jar. And I had already pre-measured those. Now we're going to put in the okra. And this one, by the time I've got my lemon, it's a little bit too long, so I'll have to trim him in a minute. But they suggest that you go alternate large ends to small ends. So this one, I'll start with the large ends down, and then come back and fill in with the short end. So later on I will do like that to fill it in. I find it's easier to fill in the bottom as much as I can with the fat ends, and then come back and just add the shorter ends to the top. So I'm going to do this for both jars. We decided to only do 2 jars tonight, just so that you can also see the other techniques or other treatments that we are doing for the okra. So I'm going to finish these and come right back. The pickling liquid for this recipe calls for 2 cups of apple cider vinegar, or cider vinegar they said, and 2 cups of water, and then I think it was 3 tablespoons of kosher salt or canning salt, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. They ask you to heat that and to dissolve the sugar and the salt into the mixture of the liquids, and then to keep it warm so that you can fill the jars with this. So this has been on the stove staying warm. You might see the steam. The recipe says to fill these jars to within a 1/4 inch of the top of the jar, but because okra is sort of hollow inside, by the time you get rid of the extra air, they settle in sometimes. So here is my tool, my plastic tool, to try to jiggle around in here, and if you can see, there are bubbles coming to the top, so this is not as full as it was before. And then I will do the same for this jar that looks right now like it's very full, but I bet that's going to settle down once the bubbles come to the surface, and we'll be closer to our 1/4 inch. You want those bubbles to come out now, or to be absorbed into the okra now rather than as you're cooking them, because then it messes up the seal. See that the other one is still sending up some bubbles. So I think I'm pretty close on that one. I might take a tablespoon out of that, but this one definitely needs some more of the liquid. And there goes some more bubbles. I sort of did a dry run for these jars to find out how many pieces of okra it was going to take, to make sure that I had enough of the right size, and just to sort of figure that out. I did that before we boiled and sterilized the jars. I think that's going to be a little bit closer to the 1/4 inch that I was going for, but then this one is going to need some more. We found that the okra tries to float, so it sort of messes up your exact measurement, but I think that's pretty close. I'm going to use a little bit of white vinegar to just clean any residue that might be on the top of these jars, just so that they have a good seal. And while I'm at it, I'm going to put some vinegar into our boiling water here. It keeps the outside of the jars from turning cloudy, and that just gives a better look for it. It doesn't make them necessarily any safer or better in that way. I have my jar lids. These are new jar lids. I had them soaking in some warm water just to help the seal. The newer jar lids, we are told, do not require soaking in hot water, but old habits are hard to break, and I don't know that it can hurt anything to just loosen up that. And I finger tightened these, and now we'll put them into the water bath canner. This has been boiling actually for quite a while we were prepping, and so it's not going to take any time for it to get back up to temperature. I am noticing that this is not a good inch above the top of these jars like it should be, so I'm going to have to add some more water to this. Oh, that was loud. I'll have to add some more water to this. When we started harvesting okra by the bunches this year, we were overwhelmed. And so I was thinking how to get that flavor of fried okra that we like so much, or that we buy prepared, already breaded in the stores. And so I experimented. I knew I wanted a cornmeal kind of a flavor to it, but the first batches tasted like I put the okra slices in pancake mix or something like that. I had too much flour. It just wasn't a good mix. So what we have started to do now is to take some flour, just regular flour. We add a little bit of salt to it because that will coat them. And then we slice our okra into this first. We take it from this dry flour mix and put it into a mix of egg and just a little bit of water. It makes the egg go a little bit it doesn't coat it quite so slimy. And then from that step, we go into the cornmeal. One thing that we have learned, even small pods sometimes can be tough. And if your knife, like this one, it's not that big of a pod, but if my knife won't go through it easily, it's not going to get more tender. We've tried to find uses for them when they're tough like this, and I can't believe the first one I picked up was a tough one, but you can just tell by the feel of it. That knife isn't even going through it. Unfortunately, our chickens aren't very fond of these either, so some of the leftovers are just ending up in our trash. Sort of wish we had pigs for sure that were hungry for okra and they could eat those pieces. So we're just going to slice these up and get them ready to put in the different sections of flour and coating, and then we'll come back. I coated the sliced okra, I would say 1/4 inch slice perhaps, coated that with the flour and salt mixture. Now I'm going to drop these in and coat them completely with the egg and water mixture. It seems that you can leave the okra in the flour for a good bit of time. Since okra has its own slime factor, it coats itself with that flour. And so then we take them from this stage into our seasoned cornmeal. I put some Mrs. Dash kind of stuff, it was a store brand of Mrs. Dash, in with my cornmeal. Just give it a little bit extra flavor. And so then we'll stir this around in here. We found that when he is able to pick a big batch of okra, this is more than the two of us can eat in a night, although I can eat quite a good bit of okra. So what we've been able to do is to put this okra on a baking sheet like this, and then we put it in our freezer until it freezes. Then we put these into a bag, a Ziploc bag, and they're ready for us to put in hot oil whenever we decide that we are hungry for fried okra some night. So we've done this with this kind of recipe. Sometimes I go ahead and cook what we're going to use that night for supper, and then what's left over I can put in the freezer. It might be a small amount that's left over, it might be a larger amount, but that's okay because we just add it to the Ziploc bags so that whenever we want to have a meal of okra, whatever time of year, as long as it lasts, then we can just dip out the amount that we need for a meal. Another thing that we've done, Kevin is not as fond of okra and tomatoes as I am, but this way we've sliced up some of the okra and put it into the freezer on trays like this, individually froze it, then put it with no coating on it into Ziploc bags, and that way if I get a hunger for okra and tomatoes later on in the year, I can just get a small amount, maybe put them with some of our tomatoes from the garden, and I can have my okra and tomatoes, and I don't have to make a big batch, and don't have to buy it from the store either. So those are other ways that we have prepared it, put it in the freezer for future use. This is the tray that I ended up with from just that few of the taller, longer pods that I cut up tonight that were not tough. This is a bag that we have in our freezer from this, just part of last month that we've already put away, plus the fact that we've been eating it a lot fried. This is the bag that is the individually frozen, uncoated pods, the sliced pods. This is what I can use to put in soups like gumbos or something like that later in the year, or I can make my okra and tomatoes out of. So those are a couple of things. Those are the end product. In just a few minutes we're going to have the end product of our pickled okra to show you also. Another technique for preserving okra that we learned this year from Kevin and Sarah at Living Traditions Homestead is that they talked about dehydrating okra. And there's a couple problems with this. The major problem is it's delicious and we can't stop eating it. It makes for dry okra that you could just pop in your mouth and snack on. Just think, all that good nutrition and so convenient. It takes about 8 to 10 hours, I think, depending on how thickly you slice the okra. But we put it in our dehydrator. And there again, I think it would be best to go ahead and use the okra that is tender. It's not going to get any less tough if you dehydrate it either, but we really like the flavor of this. Kevin suggested that we put salt on it as we were getting ready to dry it. I was afraid to do too much. I think next time we will do more salt just to give it as a salty snack. They also said on their video that they use this dehydrated later in the year to put into soups or stews or something like that. Okra will thicken your soup or your stew, so it's a nice thing to have. This is plenty dry and it sits on the counter. It was quite full just a week or two ago, and this is what happened when Carol gets a hold of it. So anyway, there you go. One more way that you can preserve a good harvest from okra. I hope we gave you some ideas about what you can do with your problem harvest where you've got too much okra and you can't handle it all at one time. Our pickled okra is ready to go, and now we talked about how I went through the dehydrated okra. Kevin's the one who makes the damage on our pickled okra crop. So both of us have something that we really enjoy. Hope that this is something that you can enjoy, that you can make use of, and we ask you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't subscribed already, and recommend us to other friends and people who could also subscribe or enjoy learning what they can do with a harvest of okra. Until next time, farewell from Hideaway Homestead.